Dennis,
Yes.
I can't get the aerial view, the 2016 aerial view, so this is just the,
No, the arrows aren't coming up.
yeah, they're not.
Yeah, I know that they were having some problems. They're served by the state. I know they had some problems with the state server.
Google Maps.
Google Maps will work. Go to Google
Well,
Maps. You want to see property lines, but go to Google Maps, you'll see the aerial.
You're having a problem with the parcel viewing?
Yeah,
You changed servers, you went to AWS.
I don't know, we didn't change servers.
Because we can't get it from the town anymore.
I know we
So
were
here-
working- I know we were
here's what
working
we're
on it
looking at.
Saturday, Friday.
it's not showing, that's the problem.
Now,
So-
you can't do the overlay from the 2016 aerial?
It's not
Yeah, the
coming
arrows won't
up.
come up.
Won't come up?
Yes,
Well, what
it is.
about one of the earlier ones?
No, they won't.
None of them.
None of it will. So just, you can just go to the Google Maps and you can pick it up on Google Maps.
Yeah, so what we'd like to start here is with some updates as to where we are and what's happening. And so, Pat, would you want to get started with that and let us know what you're doing? And whatever you.
Yeah.
I think the people in the back are having trouble hearing, so.
All right.
For the video.
Okay. I hate microphones. All right. Sorry, I'm not a microphone fan. Good afternoon. It's afternoon now.
Thank you.
I really want to thank the students from Columbia and your professor as well. We really appreciate you taking the time to come here. It's clear that you engaged in the community and really listened. Don't listen too much to Dennis though, because that's that is a danger. I try not to do that too much. But we really appreciate it. And at least in my mind, I think what I took away from this is kind of a spark to think about for each of us to walk out of here and think about. You all put probably hundreds of hours, I don't know, of thought into this. I've put a good amount in so far, but not that much. So I hope that all of us walk out of here and put some thought into what we could envision here. We really appreciate that. I'm happy to sort of give some updates and just to introduce myself, I'm the county executive. We sort of are in the process of trying to take more ownership of this property, and you may have heard some about that. I'm happy to talk about that. But ultimately, as a collective team with the supervisor and the town leadership, with the legislature and our team in county government, we see this as, I think, literally the most important thing that we have to do as a county is to turn around what used to be really a crown jewel of our economy back into something that we can be really proud of, that can create economic opportunity, that can nest with some of the ideas of a Green New Deal that I've talked about, that you all talked about. So we're excited about that. A few quick updates, and then happy to it might be easier to just answer questions, but I think the way to think about where we are, and Supervisor Quigley, jump in, because I know you have a lot more history here than I do. We have to get to a place of sort of getting to a fresh start from where we are before we can really think about where we're going. In my opinion, we have to address the remediation issues both above ground and below ground, and then we also have to address the ownership issue and kind of the lack of alignment between the vision of the current owner, which is basically not aligned with our long-term interests, and we've talked about that, and a vision that's driven by the community and trying to support and empower the community. So on the remediation side, we talked about some of the below ground stuff. IBM is really predominantly on, responsible and accountable for that. They have been relatively good partners in that, and I think they will continue to be. And as March jumped in and said, I do think it's critical that everybody understands that from a containment perspective, there is no concern about the current situation in terms of water or ground. It's contained, and we feel confident in that. Above ground, we have had issues with these asbestos piles, but recently we've made really good progress. We got the EPA to come in and actually for the first time ever use federal Superfund legislation and enact that and basically say that Allen Ginsberg, the developer and owner, is individually responsible for that remediation and any cost of that. That's a really, really big deal and something we've been waiting, frankly, decades to get to that point. We had, and many of the people here were there earlier this week, we had DEC at the state level, EPA at the federal level, and other relevant agencies, Department of Labor, all on the site looking at the asbestos piles and talking about how we get to a place where we can begin to remediate those. So that's the immediate contamination piece. And then the third aspect of kind of updating, as I mentioned, is the current ownership dynamics and where that's going. So when I came in 7-8 months ago, I'll be honest, I was pissed and frustrated that we haven't done more to change that dynamic. And so we've really been pushing hard to do that. We foreclosed on the 2 parcels on the west side of Enterprise Drive, so the old, Fleet Bank of America building, as well as that, the empty parcel along the Esopus. I'd say we're about 95% of the way there towards having full control of that. Mr. Ginsburg filed for bankruptcy as a delaying tactic, and in doing so added a little bit of time to the clock, probably anywhere from a few months to, we hope, less than a year, until we can sort of assert full control of that. But our county government now has the keys to that building. We are securing the building. We've taken that de facto responsibility for that, and I think that's an important step. And the other key piece to that is that those parcels on the west side have virtually no environmental remediation issues. So from being in a place where we now have some control and minimal environmental remediation concerns, we're relatively close to that point where we could start thinking about now how do we actually go forward, at least on that side of Enterprise. Obviously it's all linked, but at least that's sort of a first step and a first opportunity. Any big things I missed on? I think that's a lot of information, but that's kind of at least a high level updates.
In talking about that asbestos pile and saying that there is no danger, is that true with that pile? It rains, water's going to get in it, and it's going to go into the soil. So do we really know what's happening with that?
Yeah. So when I said we're not concerned, it's the below ground is where we don't have the concern. The asbestos piles are problematic. The tarps, as you know, have not been repaired. Some of them are ripped open, frayed. That is why we got the EPA to come in and take more aggressive action and say that it needs to be immediately remediated. Mr. Ginsburg had till the end of calendar year, so December 31st, to come back with a plan to the EPA. He has not done that, which now gives them more leverage to take that next step. And what would likely happen, although not certainly, is that the EPA would begin the cleanup work and ultimately kind of try to bill or hold Ginsburg financially responsible for that work. That's the sort of the next big step. That hasn't started. We have to give him sort of one more chance, but that's where we anticipate that it would likely go.
And you're declaring this site a Superfund site. What implications does that have for us?
So it's not me. It's the federal EPA, so this is a federal regulation. But what it does is it gives the EPA and us collectively as a government and a community a lot more power to now take action to clean up the site, number one, but also equally importantly to hold the current property owner accountable for the costs of that cleanup, which are estimated to be likely to be millions of dollars. So the Superfund legislation is really powerful in allowing us to have a bunch of tools now to do those things, which is a big deal. So it's a sliver of hope right now, we feel.
I just want to add something there. So the term Superfund site is kind of a scary term. So I just want to put a little bit finer point on that. EPA did not declare it a Superfund site in the big scary sense. The Superfund legislation has many different parts, and this is another part of the Superfund legislation that allows them to hold Ginsburg responsible and start doing the cleanup process. So it's not the scary kind of Superfund site that's going to be a mess forever. It's the part of that legislation that allows them to do the cleanup and hold him liable for it.
Yeah. Oh. doing a microphone exchange.
Well,
You have a question in the back.
question?
Yes. I live in Lincoln Park. I live only a few blocks from Tech City. When I look up any house in our neighborhood, if you dig deep enough online, it says 21 toxins. I only assume that those are because of Tech City. Is that true? And what are those?
I'm not sure without knowing kind of where you're looking. We can link up with you, right after this, and I'm not sure what databases you're with.
Individually going through every single property.
Tara, can you be a little bit more specific? What's the address and what are you talking about?
Actually, I've looked up every house on my street
Where did you look it up?
online. I just Googled.
And what does it
I
say?
just went from one link to another, and each one comes up, and everyone says 21 toxins.
So I think in the interest of, I'm not trying to dismiss your question, obviously this is an important question. What I think could help is for us to get with you right after this and hear where did you look, what are the toxins, make sure.
What are the toxins?
Okay, let me be clear.
Asking.
Lincoln Park's a very large geographical area. There is a dry cleaning establishment that is on Ulster Avenue that is a listed DEC contaminated site for perk in the ground from dry cleaning. In addition, on Morton Boulevard, there is a former dry cleaning facility. And in the ShopRite Plaza, there was another dry cleaning facility, which is still listed as a contaminated site for perk. So we have in our community 3 dry cleaning facilities that dumped the dry cleaning fluid out the back door, and that ended up in the groundwater. So what you may be seeing is not necessarily from IBM. In the town's hands are the annual groundwater monitoring reports that IBM is required to file. And there is a long history of these groundwater reports, and they show the natural gradient of the water flowing south to north on this site. Actually, it's south to northwest towards the Esopus Creek by Town Hall. And all the drainage facilities, including the 60-inch stormwater drain that is in the north parking lot, drains south to north. So the groundwater is going away from the habited part of the town of Ulster. That's not to say that there's not contamination, but I just cited 3 other facilities that have been identified over the last 40 years as being responsible for dumping materials into the ground.
Jim, on your site, are we going to be able to find the exact chemicals that are underneath there? Because this has been a very vague discussion of chemicals, and I just looked up trichloroethylene, and it does go into the air. It can be absorbed from air, from water, all kinds of ways. So what I'd like to know, can we find out the exact chemicals and the exact percentage on your
The
website?
Town of Ulster Library was designated as the repository back in 2010 when the consent decree was signed between IBM, Tech City, and the New York State DEC on the groundwater contamination cleanup. All those materials should be on file at the Town of Ulster Library. If they're not, call my office.
Alona, EPA also has a website on the site, and
EPA has a website on the DEC? DEC has a website. I'll send you, we can make the link available, but there's all the studies there that they've done of the groundwater. Their studies say that it's not volatilizing into the air we don't know, but when they studied it, that's what they found, that it's not volatilizing into the air and that it is contained. But you can see the list of all the chemicals there.
First of all, I want to say, under federal law, IBM is the responsible party forever and ever on this site for anything that goes wrong, which is why there are a series of deed restrictions and protective covenants filed in the Ulster County Clerk's office on title regulating activities that can take place on this site into the future. They do not want someone 20 years from now saying, oh, you did this 20 years ago, and it happened to be somebody that did something in the intervening periods. So these are recorded, they're on site, on record at the county clerk's office. Second of all, Since the discovery of the groundwater contamination, there has been an active remediation program, which has included several different types of protocols or applications that they've tried to use to clean up the groundwater. The groundwater plume has shrunk. The groundwater plume at one time on the south side extended a little bit on underneath Enterprise Drive. That is by the fact that there is a series of monitoring wells that have annual testing that is around the site. They monitor those wells periodically and provide reports. The plume has shrunk. The current application is a method where they've put electrodes into the ground and have cooked or vaporized the contaminants away. The problem is that the source, the original source, was a 3,000 gallon in-ground storage tank for cleaning solvents that was under building 2 in the northeast corner, which is the middle building that's now demolished. IBM needed access to that corner of the building, but while the physical structure was there, they could not gain access. They spent 5 years arguing with Allen Ginsberg over who was responsible for the disposal of the asbestos tile on the concrete floor over the top of the slab. And Ginsberg kept saying it was IBM's responsibility. Consequently, that tank is still in the ground. It has only been in the last 2 years, with the structures being demolished, that IBM has had contractors on site drilling through the slabs of the buildings that used to be there, doing testing to determine what is the extent of the groundwater contamination under the building pads. In the 2011 master plan that was a part of the environmental impact statement, the entire center of the complex where the building pads exist today was unbuildable. They were designated as parking lots and parking lots only. And that was because the developer did not want to take and incur the money to deal with excavation of the building and how to protect the workers from the subsoil contamination. The consent decree that was signed in 2011 identifies various portions of the site and puts into place certain restrictions on their future use. For example, residential is not allowed on this site. Public parkland, because of the exposure through the grass to the ground contamination, is restricted in many of the areas. These are all on record in a consent decree from 2011, and that is in my office. Vince, you're raising your hand.
Yes, maybe a new point, but now that the county's involved, this problem has been facing the town of Ulster for 20 years plus. What kind of leverage can the county give us to help you and the town, because we have made no real major force to make it. IBM is ultimate responsible for this. Mr. Ginsberg has maybe part of the problem, but it was IBM who created the problem. So when can we get IBM to come and clean it up so we could build a house there?
There is 2 separate problems. IBM, as I said, has the subsurface contamination forever and ever. They did it.
So why can't
Okay?
we clean it?
They are cleaning it. And we expect them to continue to clean it until it's to a level that is satisfactory to the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Do we have to take IBM's slow timeline? Are we forced to take that timeline?
No.
Yeah.
There is a current process going on with the DEC right now. As I just said, they fought for years to gain access to the original site of the contamination. It's now open. The debris piles were, up until about a year and a half ago, on top of the location where they needed to drill. All the debris from the demolition of the center structures is now in a pile along the back. The center area is now open. We are allowing I should say DEC is allowing IBM's engineers to continue the process of investigating to determine what is the appropriate steps that they have to go about to clean this up. One of the things, as I said, they have electrodes in there that they heat up and that cooks the materials out. There is a little building on Enterprise Drive. If anybody goes in on the side, it sits off next to the guard shack. You'll see that's part of the remediation program where there was water. That was, I think, a prior attempt where they tried to pump out the groundwater, aerate it, and then put the groundwater back in.
Yeah, it was air stripping.
So there have been a series of different technologies applied to clean it up, and from what I've been told from the DEC, they are coming to the end where they're going to be able to determine, to declare that this has been satisfactorily cleaned up.
And I think just to build on that, you're asking exactly the question that I asked and that I think a lot of us feel, which is why the hell has this taken so long?
If I spill 5 gallons of oil on my yard, DEC's there and says, get that cleaned up or you're going to
You don't have
jail."
20 years to clean it up.
No, not 20 years.
Yeah.
And this is a significant plume.
Yep.
And it also is significantly located near our aquifer in the town of Ulster.
Right.
If we had an overlay map to see where our aquifer is, it's right next to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you take, like, let's take Flint, Michigan, our government, and I'm not saying you, don't take this wrong, they lied to us right to our teeth. The DEC is the most impotent people in the world. They let New York State wetlands be desecrated and they don't do anything about it. So why are we putting our faith in them? Why, now that you're here, have the federal government come in and say, Mr. IBM, you guys got the money, you've screwed us for 25 years, let's get it done.
So you asked what the county can do, okay? Mr. Ryan's only been in office since April of last year. Now, wait, okay? Previous administration faced the same issues with unpaid real estate taxes that the current administration faces. Mike Hine made a step to foreclose, but he only went so far. Now, we step up. Back in April, acting county executive Adele Ryder made a decision. When this first started hitting the paper about him not paying the electric charges, she commenced the foreclosure action on the Bank of America building, which at that point in time was 3 years in arrears and was, from an environmental point of view, the cleanest piece of collateral they could grab. They fought like hell in court until Judge Williams finally made a decision back in October that said that the county can proceed with the foreclosure. On the day Judge Williams signed the order, the county attorney filed the deed in the county clerk's office taking title to the property. This administration has been expeditious in their actions. Now the second thing is Ginsburg filed a bankruptcy action 3 days after the deed was filed. He thought he was going to stay the transfer. By filing 3 days after the deed was filed, he changed the legal profile of his rights in his bankruptcy from one of staying a potential future transfer to trying to argue about a fraudulent conveyance and causing the county to give back the deed. There's two different legal standards related to that action.
I can understand, I'm trying to understand all that legal action.
Yeah.
And I'm not holding you back.
No.
But however, this has been a lingering problem. And as a taxpayer, I don't want to see the county buy it back. Because then we're faced, unless we're getting a cleaned up piece of property. Until it's cleaned up, don't go after it. Why would we take on the responsibility?
What you don't understand is that every day they don't go after it, they write $3.5 million worth of checks to the town of Ulster and the school district. And today, that represents $15 million. The fund balance is how much?
Our total fund?
Yeah.
About 30.
Okay.
And
So-
I understand that part of it.
Do you mind if I jump in?
Go ahead.
Can I just say one more thing that I'm done?
Yeah.
In that light, just in that light, how hasn't the county of Ulster and the town of Ulster gone after IBM to straighten this site out so the county doesn't have to make us whole? And that's my bottom line.
The bottom line is IBM, because they sold the property to Ginsburg in 1996, transferred everything on the surface.
But they're still responsible under the law.
They're responsible for the subsurface contamination. They're not responsible for the asbestos.
So
I'm not worried about the asbestos, that's the least
I'm
of
not
our
sure we
problem.
did anywhere.
I think, so I'm going to zoom out from kind of 50 feet to 10,000 feet. The details obviously matter, but I hope, you know, part of what we're trying to do here is answer, I think, what a lot of what you're saying, which is you want transparency. You want to feel like everybody knows what's going on, because there have been other issues in other communities where the government has said things are okay and they're not. And what I want you to know from me, I'm going to tell you the straight up one way or the other. You know, the asbestos piles are concerning. That's why we are addressing them aggressively. We feel relatively good about the situation below ground, but to your point, we are absolutely not going to let IBM off the hook. They are the macro party who got us in this situation. And I hope what you feel from me and what you've seen from me in 7-8 months is that I am not a patient person, and we are speeding up and getting more aggressive, using every means. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but to boil down what Supervisor Quigley said is we really effectively used a legal maneuver to cut maybe years of time off of Ginsburg trying to run out the clock and delay us. And so those are the things we're going to continue to do while also working with IBM.
I applaud you for that, but I still stick to my point.
I hear you.
Hope you're not a patient guy. You're going to grab IBM by the throat because they have the money. Look what you did to our community. Look what you did to our town. We cannot send this site out to be redeveloped because of this plume.
Yeah.
And Ginsburg's a lousy guy, we all know that. But IBM ultimately caused the problem. Get IBM back here to clean the problem up, Pat.
I hear you.
Thank you, Mike.
Pat, does the EPA give us any leverage with that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, that's one of the big, in addition to the ability to put pressure on Mr. Ginsburg, triggering that Superfund legislation, and thank you for the
Mr.
kind of
Ryan,
clarification.
Sorry, I've been very
Yeah.
patient.
I'm
I'd
sorry.
like to ask my question.
Yeah.
Two things. One, Ginsburg's not going to pay for cleanup. I'm pretty sure we all know that, no matter how accountable he's found for it. So is that merely a leverage device for you guys to try to get the property from? Say, hey, you want to pay to clean it up? Two, IBM's had 30 years now. And to hear that we have to wait for their timeline, they could excavate the entire site and bring in fresh soil that's not contaminated.
Sure. Yeah, so
We are frustrated.
I am
My
too.
kind didn't do a lot for this community in spite of what people say. So
All I can do is say what I'm going to do and what we're focused on. I share your I share your frustration. My grandpa worked there for 36 years. My mom taught at Chambers, and a lot of her kids were exposed to that. I mean, this is real for me. I know, like it is to you all. On the first part of your question, what's kind of the tactics and techniques. The tactics and techniques are every single lever we have, apply as much pressure as we possibly can. I wish I could, break the law and be more aggressive like the landowner does, but we have to follow the law, and that's, we'll continue to do that. Your point is right. I think you're thinking about this the right way, though. How do we get to a situation where it's no longer in the interest of the current, developer to continue to just sit on this land and to be willing to say, look, time to get out of here and let you all, as a community, figure out where we go from here. And then on the IBM point, same thing. I do think it's important to note, though, part of the delay, a significant part of the delay for why IBM wasn't able to clean up below ground, as the supervisor mentioned, is because of the delays of Mr. Ginsburg not allowing them access to get below ground. It's a lot of excuses and blame game, but that's part of why. And again, we're just not going to tolerate that kind of stuff anymore. So we're going to keep pushing. I mean, to have EPA, DEC, State DOL, and a bunch of other folks on the site there just 3 days ago, that's a big deal in terms of now having everybody woken up and working on this. So we're going to keep pushing.
Is there any thought of using the Bank of America building to consolidate government offices and then turn a building like this into commercial space again, or
Yeah, and I appreciate your question.
turning that into a medical office building or something along those lines?
Yeah, did you?
No, because as I say, this would be
I think
the way
that
to bring
transitions
Dennis
into,
Oh, no, I'm
into-
fine. The boss is talking, I'm fine.
I assume Dennis will tell me when I'm wrong, which is what he is, you know, or if I'm saying something wrong. I appreciate the question because a big part of the first hour today was to start to think about where do we go. Obviously, we have to clean up the current situation. But what I want, one of the messages I wanted to kind of share with you all is from how we're going to approach this perspective. All options are on the table, and my goal is that this not be done sort of by 5 people sitting around a table, whether it's the county office building or wherever, but that we really engage everybody in the process, whether that's smart, you know, students who are experts in this, thinking about ideas, or community members, or some combination. I do think there's an opportunity to look at, you know, some future that includes, you know, government at different levels having some presence there. I think that's absolutely on the table.
I mean, you know, unless there's some, you know, you have some businesses in line that, you know, would want to take over the space relatively quickly.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities we have is at the point at which, or if we decide we want to open up sort of some kind of bidding process or the opportunity for different people to propose plans, one of the things we could offer as a collective, you know, government is to say, well, we might be a core tenant who would be willing to sign a long-term lease to help make this attractive for a developer who could then bring in other commercial activity or research institutions, educational institutions. So, you know, I think we could help make that more attractive, more broadly. I mean,
Well, what the students brought up is a cooperative type of thing, so that we don't get just one developer like we have now.
right.
Okay, and I think that's a really good idea, and I think that will benefit the community. And it needs to benefit the local community. We don't really want to bring in people that are going to take jobs away from the local community. We want locals making jobs for local people. But what is the real next step now that you?
Housing too.
Well, but as I understand that there's not supposed to be any housing on that property at this point, okay? With what
At least,
our supervisor has
Can you
said.
show us where it's not allowed?
yeah, at least significant parts.
Do you have the 2011 consent decree?
Not in front of me.
Okay, well, it's in there.
I got it right here.
But what is the next steps? I mean, obviously, you're taking your steps to keep the developer from putting us off.
Yep.
Okay, but once we have some control over this land, what is the next steps?
We're in the next step, right here.
Yeah, right. So, right. But I mean, where can we find funding? You know, obviously, we're going to need many sources of funding, and that's something that I don't know anything about.
Yeah, and everybody jump in, but my sense is people will be less excited to put up the funds for the cleanup because nobody wants to do that. That's where I think government will play a bigger role between local, state, federal. But I mean, jump in, but my sense about, you know, private sector or even not-for-profits or being interested in this site, I mean, the interest, the strengths of this property, as I think the second team laid out really well in their kind of setup, between access to infrastructure, location and proximity to the city, rail lines, so on and so forth, I don't think there's going to be a shortage of, I mean, we get unsolicited requests and interest in this site, even now knowing it needs a lot of work. Once we're able to get to a cleanup, I think our problem will more be actually making sure that we have a set of values as a community that we've thought about to say, here are the guardrails we want to put on anyone who's going to come in. You know, what are our priorities to do some of the things you outlined from a values perspective. So that's the work we want.
No chemicals, please.
I think that's a good one.
And that is in the restrictive covenants on title right now. But I wanted to say that in my 10 years in office, there has never been a lack of interest on this site, and I know there's a couple of commercial real estate people in this room right now that will tell everyone the same thing. There's been an inability of an owner to close a deal for whatever reason. But that point We're past that point now because his inability to close a deal is holding this community hostage to the point that this facility at one time paid... Ginsburg.
Yeah.
At one time, this facility paid 1/3 of all the taxes in the town of Ulster. 1/3. Today, it's not paying anything. The county's paying, making the towns whole on everything that's coming out of there. So, you've all heard about the stories that how the town has been hit with the assessment adjustment from the Hudson Valley Mall. I'm saying this again, the transition of this property from the ownership structure that it has now to a county ownership is going to take it off the tax roll. That is going to produce a hit that is equally as hard as the hit that we absorbed with the Hudson Valley Mall. And I can tell you there's another 2 buildings out here, one of which currently owes the county $6 million and hasn't paid taxes since 2012 that also needs to be addressed. And then there's, I'll leave it at that because I don't want to give an owner too much of an information that he may be overassessed. These are the things that keep me up. Huh?
That would be wise.
Yes. These are the things that keep me up at night. Because these are the things that either give the town of Ulster the ability to deliver the services that the community has come to expect, or is going to cause us to have a discussion about what services go away because we can no longer afford them. Those are discussions I'd rather not have because we do have a nice community to live in. Everybody knows that when it snows, the roads are plowed, and everybody knows that when they call 382-1111, our police department shows up quickly. Those are 2 sets of services that no one wants to lose or have degraded.
Dennis?
I would just say that there's been a number of ways that you can look at this site, and one of the things I think that the students did for us, as we think about what they did, is a transect, which basically starts with a more environmentally friendly or greener site as we move from, as we are down by the Esopus, and as we move up on the campuses where the Bank of America building was, and then on the East Campus, you can see that transect involved in terms of a more built environment in those areas. I would also add that the county does have an environmental attorney, so we are pushing DEC relative to that in terms of where we are in a cleanup and making sure that we have honest brokers in the room that report directly to the county executive office. I would also say that some of this discussion about funding is really dependent upon the vision itself. It's very simple to have a conversation and say, I want money to do X. But if X is going to take you a significant amount of time to get through the approval processes, to go through the environmental reviews, and to finally get on the ground, all the amount of funding that you get is not necessarily going to be helpful. So we look at this as a public-private partnership, and I can tell you that in the past, when Ginsburg first came into here, there was a substantial amount of folks that were really looking forward to essentially seeing the project, the property redeveloped. This town went through a process called a generic environmental impact statement. There was a concept plan developed for the site. That concept plan went through looking at how much stormwater, how much sewer, what the tax revenues would be, how many square footage, what the traffic generation would be, how that all would fit. Came to a conclusion that it wouldn't have a significant impact on the environment, and then rezoned the site based on that concept plan. Now that concept plan may or may not have legs in today's economy and today's environment, but it's a process that you can think of going through in order so that when you go to a funding source, you can say, this is what we want to do, the community's totally on board, and not only is the community on board, but the other entities that are also involved in these approval processes, which is the regulatory agencies at the state level, the regulatory agencies at the federal level. One of the controls that are here is an easement across IBM for the entire site, that they're on board as well in terms of what we're going to do on the site relative to their environmental liability. And last but not least, the county has an IDA, and the IDA can play a role here as well. So if you think about it that way, I think our first challenge is to create a vision which everybody can buy into. and that's why you're here today.
Yeah, and just really quickly to beat a dead horse, that's my request or my kind of challenge to you all is if you talk to an investor or developer, the number one risk is not money, it's time and the unpredictability of time. And that's usually driven by the community not being on the same page. While we work the cleanup, if we in this room and all of our, kind of neighbors in the community can do that hard work, which is hard work to say, what do we see here? What could this be? What should it not be at a minimum? Then when we have the cleanup over the next, realistically, it's probably, we're still talking a few more years, I think, and we have control of the property, we've done the work as a community, so we're not then adding more time. So that's what I hope, you all are willing to do, and we're happy to obviously participate in that too, but we want it to come from you ultimately.
Well, obviously, I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll shut up. Obviously, the students have given us some really good ideas, and obviously, the environment that we're in today is more to protect the environment. And, that site gets so much sun, I think that it would behoove us to not, we need to put some solar on there, and to make sure that, we have renewables on that site. It will benefit anybody that goes in there. And I think based on what we've been through, we want to be a lot more wiser.
I agree.
Environmentally.
Are there other principles? Oh, I'm sorry, Manager.
Yeah, I just wanted to create a little historic context, and I'll use the Hudson River PCBs as an example. Clearwater's worked on that for about 40 years. But in 2002, it was determined that GE had to do the cleanup. It took until 2005 to get a consent order, and then it took till 2009 to do a design for the remediation. And that started in 2009, finished in 2016. The leverage that EPA had is that if GE didn't clean up the PCBs, that they could come in and do that and charge GE triple damages for the cost of the cleanup. But EPA didn't have the money to do that, so it was almost an idle threat. That work has been done. We still want to see more remediation, but I wanted to explain how that situation works. And I have a question about the treatment of the TCE and PCE. What I heard is electrodes being put into the ground, creating heat to ensure that the material goes away or essentially volatilizes, which means goes into the air. And I just want to know if air monitoring has been done or is being done, because there is no such place as a way. It's either in the ground or in the air.
I can't answer.
I actually don't. We can get the answer to that. I don't want to give you the wrong information. We can.
Off the top of your head. No,
yeah.
I just want to check that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm wondering what kind of outside proposals you've already gotten for the site until people are scared away from, the timeline or pollution.
I mean, we don't get them currently. They go to. I mean, every once in a while you'll sort of hear something conceptual, and feel free to jump in, Jen. But right now they're more directed to the current owner.
Right.
So I wouldn't. Yeah. And I only have 7 months of history. So, but if you have more.
We had a big meeting where Deloitte and Touche came in with a client who wanted to put a manufacturing facility aggregating 1 million square feet on the site. I told them to go away when they told me it was a 350-foot smokestack that was going to go smack in the middle of the site. We've had several other smaller users to try to find the unicorn that can use the whole 250 acres. It's an impossible task. I can tell you, without naming names, there are 3 local companies that are each looking for 100,000 square foot of space that requires 10 acres to build new manufacturing plants. They're in the area, they need to expand. If they can't expand here, they're moving. Cirrus Technologies was a tenant in some of the buildings along the railroad tracks. They wanted to stay, but they had problems with the landlord. They moved. The food processor that was in the back along the railroad tracks vacated last December. He moved. Right now, every tenant on that site is looking to move. In addition, Mr. Ginsburg has an action in Town of Ulster Justice Court to evict Farm to Table Market. Okay? I don't understand why he wants to evict somebody, but he wants them out. Now, on the other hand, about a year and a half ago or so, the company came to me through a broker that said they wanted to buy the whole East Campus, and they were going to put heavy industrial there. And I looked at their financing proposals, and after having a career on Wall Street for 23 years, I kind of know what a good proposal looks like. And come back when you got a check in your hand. And they're still out there. They're still talking about building railroad cars there for high-speed passenger traffic. There's also another company out there that wants to talk about building a fabrication facility for fiberglass type reinforcing rod as a replacement for steel to be used in concrete structures. There's no lack of interest. There's just a lack of an ability to get a deal done. I've had numerous conversations with Empire State Development over the years, and it always ends up that Tech City's at the bottom of the pile because they know they can put hundreds of hours into trying to get a deal to come to Kingston, and it's not going to close. You know, there's a lot of people in here that talked about and fought against Niagara Bottling for whatever reasons. And one of the things that I heard from Niagara Bottling when we talked about the site that they wanted to take and go on along the Esopus Creek, they did not want to go on the main campus because of the environmental contamination. So major food companies who are concerned about their reputation do not want to be associated with a brownfield site. So that's going to be a challenge going forward from the agricultural and food community. What we have here today, or had here 3 months ago, were 2 local agricultural users that responded to cheap real estate. They were getting a good deal. In fact, Farm to Table Market went into the old IBM cafeteria space where the kitchens were already built out, and all they did was repurpose them. They're in the process of talking about a relocation right now to another location within this community, and they're talking about $2 to $5 million of new capital investment to replicate and modernize the facilities that they need to stay in business. So what you have here is you had an incubator that was successful because it was cheap. And now you have a landlord that's kind of lost interest and wants to retire to his nice Miami Beach front condo that has a great view based upon the pictures that Pat showed me. Have you been there?
I have not. He didn't invite me, yeah.
So, one more question over here, and then I sort of want to get to a summary and somehow back to our agenda. I think we've covered everything that we had wanted to, except for maybe perhaps next steps. So I just want to leave a few minutes for that. So, Jennifer?
So you talked about ownership structure, and I was going to present, but this was much more compelling, and my question is whether you explore cooperative structures or you explore other ownership structures, and Dennis hinted a little bit at this. A rezoning of the site could also result in subdividing it in some way that allows for a more flexible redevelopment. Have you looked at the idea of subdividing that site the way, let's say, thousands of sites that have been repurposed across the country have been doing now for a couple of decades?
Yeah, I mean, we go jump in, but I mean, we have put no boxes or boundaries and are open to really any idea that will both align with the values of what people here want and turn it back into something that drives jobs and tax revenue and starts, rather than the downward cycle, starts us back on an upward cycle. So we're open to any of those ideas and new models, because I think a lot of what we've talked about and Evelyn and Dennis are going to be doing a lot of this deep work, and the guidance that I've given them is we need to try new things, because the traditional models of economic development, largely, particularly in upstate New York, are not working. So we need to be open to that, if you guys want to add to that.
In 1996, this parcel, which was at that time a 250-acre parcel, owned by one owner, and it was a single parcel, according to the land records, was subdivided into 27 separate parcels. Each building became its own taxable parcel, with the parking lots in the green area of 95 acres being its own parcel. That 95 acres, according to the documents on file in the county clerk's office, was the most valuable parcel that was there and held the most future for economic development and redevelopment. But it was valued on the tax roll at zero. Why was it valued at zero? It was valued at zero because it provided the parking lots and entrance and egress to the buildings that were part of the complex. It provided the utility easements and everything else. So people ask me, why did you let him tear the buildings down? He tore the buildings down, and we put a $5 million value on the 95 acres.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need the parking lots anymore because the buildings weren't there.
So Supervisor.
Next year will be the third year he won't pay the taxes on the 95 acres. And guess what the county executive is going to do? He's going to take those 95 acres, which was the key acorn that Mr. Ginsburg was holding out to sell.
So Jennifer raises a great question. How do you go about looking at the site in a different way than it's been looked at in the past? The supervisor gave you a detailed history of where we are, which is essentially, when you look at the site, you think of it as, it reads as one big area. It's not. It has multiple owners in LLCs throughout it, and it's all broken up. However, the site infrastructure is not broken up. So when he talks about utility easements and those types of easements, you need to recognize that there's a complicated dance that has to be done when you take a large campus like this and you move it into separate areas and you look at development proposals to do that. And so looking at this, you start to think about what type of entities can play that role. So you may end up with an entity that you get rid of the subdivision and it takes the entire campus, and then you look at land leases or ground leases or development areas that get developed on that. You may end up with saying to yourself, well, we'll hold certain areas, that entity will, but we're going to sell those development sites off, because a lot of the developers may want their own individual sites. But recognizes, you heard a reference, for example, to the 60-inch stormwater. There are multiple utilities that run all over this site that we really need to get a handle of. I think fortunately we know some of that because of the engineering firms that were around, that are still around, that have that. But this is a complicated issue, and we need to approach it with some finesse and some understanding of what the developers need and what the industries need and what government is capable of versus what the private sector is capable of. Does that answer your question, Jen?
It's beginning to.
Okay.
I'm not talking about 27 sites, I'm talking about a much more fine-grained approach to getting it into a place that would be marketable. Even maybe allowing those 27 subdivided pieces to become planned development districts.
And you think of this, she's talking about zoning, and you're starting to think of this either as a planned development area, if there's various ways we can define that. But think of this as an overlay zone that allows a maximum amount of flexibility for those folks that are interested in developing here. And if you think of it that way, you can see how it could come forward. I would say this, the west side of the campus is far less challenging than the east side of the campus. The west side of the campus almost offers an opportunity today, once we achieve ownership, to essentially start to think about how we can market that and how that can be developed. And that may end up being our focus, and it's something that you should think about looking at this. The last thing I want to say is that redevelopment of existing industrial lands is one of the greenest things that we can do rather than building a green field. So think about it that way as well.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just want to say that I'm glad that Dennis said that I was newly elected to the legislature, but in 2009, December 31st, 2009, I left the legislature, and we're virtually in the same place we were then as we are today. The one thing that's going to be different with this approach this time is we have a good relationship between the town, the county legislature, the county executive and his staff to try and resolve this problem so everyone has a say, everyone is involved, and it benefits the entire town. I just want to point out one thing. I also chair the Economic Development Committee in the county legislature, and I live right here. Okay, that's my house, okay? So I have a vested interest in what happens there. And as chairman of the committee that will be overseeing this from the county legislature, I promise you that we're going to make sure that things are done right. I promise that, okay? And the executive, I have been talking about this since before he was elected the first time, and we've had probably a couple of dozen different conversations about it since then, and we're going to continue to have them along with Lisa and the other folks in the county government. We're going to make this work. This is an opportunity that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this big eyesore that has been thorn in our side for 2 decades now and make it become a crown jewel. This is something that is one of the goals that I have when I decided to run. This is one of the reasons right here we're looking at it. So I just wanted to give you my 2 cents. Thanks.
And I have a house, one neighborhood over behind Brian, that I'm in the process of renovating to move to. So, yes, we're in the same neighborhood.
And Pat, I don't know where the other mic
I was going
is.
to talk about next steps, so why don't you?
Okay, so how do we round this all up, and what are the next steps? I think you have a plan of certain things you're going to do. Obviously, us here in this room, everybody has a vested interest in what happens, and I think that everybody in this room is here to help and support all of you in whatever is done, and we believe that participation is really key to getting this forward. So how do we work together? What do you need from the citizens? And what are your immediate next steps? We've identified the 2 big issues, which I did point out on the agenda, which were Allen Ginsberg and IBM. Those 2 things simultaneously have to be overcome in order to move anything forward. So I think we're going to hear from Evelyn on where we can go from here.
Yeah, so, as County Executive Ryan said, we're going to keep working on the contamination issues with all the relevant agencies. We're going to keep working on the foreclosure process and taking title to the land. But I think the piece that's really the next step for the community, as County Executive Ryan said, is that we need to come up with a shared vision for where this site needs to go. And Dennis and I and our staff, our great team, are going to be working on that. But the important part is that we have a shared set of principles for how the site's going to be used. We're not going to be able to create a detailed design, right? But we've got to create the framework that says this is what we want. This is what we want the site to do for the community. These are the guardrails, the things that we definitely are not going to have here, and then work on a planning process that will ready us for development when all the other pieces are in place. And we're really looking forward to working with you on it.
Yeah, and I think and not to prescribe the format, but I mean, if you all could do the work, and we're happy to jump in or not, whatever you want, but almost think of it like not a constitution, but like a charter, kind of a few-page document as a community that says, look, these are kind of the high-level values we hold, the kinds of things we could see happening here, the kind of things we don't want to see happening here, to begin that discussion. That might be a way to do it. I mean, you all are smarter than me at these sorts of things, but I think that's something that I've thought about is sort of, that would be a powerful document to help us guide than when we move to a process where we open it up to others. And then I think Dennis brought up a really important point that I'd love you all to think about too, which is we potentially have an opportunity